March 25th, 2013 meeting of the East Penn School District Board of School Directors is hereby called to order. Please rise and join me in saluting the flag.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
With the board's indulgence, I'm going to take a little bit of deviation from the agenda because we have our Student Government Association representatives here. I'm going to have them make their report before we hear requests to address the board. Is there any objection to that?
Hello, my name is Akita. This is Woodroni. So starting off the next high school, so the sports season has just begun. We have the lacrosse team, the baseball team, the girls lacrosse team, the softball team, which is in Florida, and they won a tournament, and the tennis team in action.
Also, we have 12 current seniors who've already declared where they're going to go play their sports for college next year. Also, just like with the sports programs, some games are already starting to do their scrimmages right now, and then like they're going to begin to start playing actual games in about 2 weeks. I thought there was no scrimmages. Sorry.
For SGA, actually, specifically, we recently, in our last meeting, talked about the matchmaker survey that we were trying out, and we had over 1,000 participants. We had 1,004 kids that made filled out surveys and got their results. And it was really cool. You know, you look over the cafeteria and everyone has this survey and their results and looking at who they're matched up with within the school. And so that's pretty successful. We didn't make a lot of profit, but it was good to just get it out to everyone and they really understand what it is now. So that was a really good event for student government.
Right now, also in student government, we're also trying to have 4 more freshmen join our organization. Each year we do 4 in the fall and 4 in the spring. And during the fall, it's more popular votes, so we know like who students we can usually like count on to like bring out like the vote and like have people like their opinions matter when they come to like a school dance or like a certain activity that we're trying to pass, like the matchmaker. And then through the spring, we're going through evaluations how we think we'll actually see them participate, and like we're doing interviews of them now, so we can actually get the feel for them.
Recently, the track team held their annual Shape of the Brave event, and they raised over $45,000 for childhood cancer research. So extremely successful. There was over 60 kids shaved their heads. We had like 5 girls shave their heads. It was really cool to see and really inspirational. You know, a lot of people come out just to watch and they end up getting their head shaved right there on the spot because they're so moved by what people have to say. So it was great to come out and see that again. And again, $45,000 towards childhood cancer research.
And that all that money was actually from those 60 students who got their head shaved. They went out and just asked for donations from like their churches, their like friends from school, like places they work. They just asked, and people were like willing enough to do it for a good cause.
I'm sure you're all familiar with the recent conference at the high school. Mr. Cabrera has assembled what he calls a task force of students from each grade level who are kind of representative of different aspects of the student body. And basically, he asked us to find out anything we can and basically report back to him during weekly meetings. And I can say I'm pretty usually well informed with what happens in the school, and I don't really heard anything specifically about who did this. Obviously, we caught one girl, but other than that, I'm not sure what's going to happen. But it's just we have a task force we're working on. So.
One measure that that was taken in due to the bomb threats was because they were being spotted throughout like the bathrooms. So what they did is like we just monitored a few of them, like mostly the most heavily used ones for like the social studies hallway, the language department, the English department, and like down by the caf, which is like those were like the main areas where the notes were found. So like those are like the most monitored, and like it's a hassle like for some of the students. Like sometimes like it's easy enough for them to go like in between class periods, but now they can't. But like it's all just for precautions, so we don't have another one and miss another day.
Yes, it's definitely not easy to use the bathroom anymore. You have to kind of sign out during your class. It took me 11 minutes the other day to go to the bathroom and come back, so I missed a little bit of work, but it's a necessary measure that needs to be taken. So, students from the last class, the German class and humanities, are currently in, I think it's Italy or Greece. I'm not sure where they went first, but they're over in Europe touring and learning things for their classes. So that's cool.
Also, Corral left today to go to Germany, I believe it was Italy and Prague, to go sing. I believe Cortez had a taste of church like every year, like the top four Corral singers they have.
That's all I have.
Yep.
Thank you. Are there any questions for our student guests? Mr. Earnshaw?
Just a comment, the AP German students are in Munich right now. They'll be there for 400 days. Tomorrow they'll be visiting Dachau, the former concentration camp. That should be a very sobering experience for our students and a reminder of the man's inhumanity to man, why we must never let that happen again. I'm glad that the school has made this opportunity available for those students who choose to avail it themselves.
Definitely worth taking during this class.
Thank you, Mr. Earnshaw. I also like to, on behalf of the board, let our students know that we really think highly of them for this Shade for the Brave fundraiser. $45,000 is a tremendous amount of money for a high school to raise, and it all goes to a good cause, and we're very, very proud of our citizens of the East Penn High School, Mays High School, so I appreciate that very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your report. The next item is request to address the board. I have 4 this evening. First one will be Ms. Susan Coonan from McCungie, speaking about Willow Lane transportation.
Good evening. I noticed that on tonight's agenda you have the option to vote on the 0.75 distance for eliminating busing for children of Willow Lane. If you decide to eliminate busing, I do highly recommend that we go with the 0.75 option, and this is why. Over the past week, I conducted my own independent survey of all Willow Lane parents. I had 135 responses, which is approximately a 30% response rate. And using data from my survey, as well as the East Penn transportation study from February 11th, I just wanted to share some findings with you. If we were to eliminate busing for the 1.5-mile distance, by my calculations, I would estimate that the minimum number of vehicles that would be dropping off students at the school would be 245. The maximum number of cars would be approximately 324. If you compare that to looking at the statistics for the 0.75-mile distance, the minimum number of cars that we could expect would be 89, and the maximum number of cars would be 186, with the average number of cars being 138, which is approximately the number of cars that go to the school currently. So based on those differences, a maximum number of cars of 324 with the 1.5-mile distance versus 186 for the maximum number for 0.75, I think for vehicle traffic and pedestrian safety, the 0.75 option is the better option. I also looked at the number of walkers that we could anticipate with the 0.75 miles from the school radius, and it looks to be, in a rough estimate, that we would have up to 60 walkers per day. I just wanted to mention just a couple other things regarding the vehicles that I would expect, the maximum number of 186. I do want to point out in the switching of the bus and car traffic at Willow Lane that we would be eliminating 10 drop-off spaces. In the current configuration, we have 22 parent drop-off spaces. Based on the new site plan, there will only be 12. And in addition, I also just have a couple of questions about the status of some other things. At the last meeting, Dr. Seidenberger mentioned that Dr. Moyer would convene a parent committee in the next week or two, and that hasn't happened yet, to the best of my knowledge. I volunteered to be on the committee, and I have not been contacted. I also wanted to check on the status of the plans for the on-site improvements. When will they be formally filed with Lower Macungie Township to begin the approval process? To my knowledge, they have not been filed yet. but that was from the Board of Commissioners meeting. Just a couple more questions, I'll be done. Which of the safety concerns that I raised in my 17-page report will be addressed in the final plan? Have the on-site plans been reviewed by a traffic or a transportation engineer? And if yes, what was his or her feedback? And I would very much appreciate posting the final plans on the East Penn website so they would be available for public review. And finally, I was very alarmed last meeting when a parent explained a situation regarding a meeting, the 11/27 parent meeting, and the fact that it was placed on the district calendar on February 25th. And I just wanted to check on the status of that investigation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Quinn. Next request to address the board I have is from Lee LaRussa of McCungy, speaking on the transportation resolution.
Good evening, everyone. I'm here tonight to ask for you all to support the 0.75 resolution. I'm a little worried, frankly, about the vote. I've asked a couple people not on the board what they thought would happen tonight. I'm just not so sure because I'm fearing that there's people that will vote against it for differing opinions. That you might vote against it because you think that things should stay the way they are, and therefore this resolution's not right. Or that you think that busing should be eliminated for everybody up to the original 1.5 mile radius. And if that's the case, then you're going to defeat this measure, which is a good compromise. It addresses your budget concerns. It addresses safety and traffic concerns all in one compromised issue. I think that's what's before you. I think that's the best thing that we've come up with. I think that's the best decision for you to make tonight, would be to vote in support of making the radius for busing 0.75 miles. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. LaRussa. The next name I have to address the board tonight is Mr. Garrett Rhodes of Allentown, speaking on the electronics recycling event.
Thank you, Mr. Ballard. Last Saturday, the Eastern Pennsylvania Business Owners Network hosted an electronics recycling event at the Willow Lane Elementary School to benefit the East Penn School District's Angel Network. I just wanted to share some of the results of this event with you. We had approximately 150 people take advantage of the event. We collected roughly 9,000 pounds of consumer electronics to be recycled. Items will be disassembled, plastic and glass will be recycled, circuit boards and cords are smelted for reuse as industrial metals, and all hard drives are shredded per federal regulation. And our fundraising results were much better than we had originally anticipated. We took in $452.27 in cash and coin, 2 checks totaling $45, 1 car wash token, 1 Canadian penny, and a few pieces of seashell. I not so randomly valued the car wash token, Canadian penny, and seashells at $2.73 and dropped off checks this afternoon to Mr. Decker at Lower McCungy Middle School, totaling an even $500 to help East Penn students in need with food, clothing, and school supplies through the Angel Network. I would also like to thank all of the volunteers who came out to help us during the event and who made it such a success. I also wanted to publicly thank Dr. Moyer, Dr. Seidenberger, and the rest of his staff for allowing us to use the Willow Lane Elementary School parking lot to host the event. This was an excellent example of the school district and the community working together for the benefit of our district's needy families and to demonstrate our mutual commitment to green operational policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rhodes. The last name I have this evening is Mr. Lou Schuler of Allentown, speaking on board member comments on social media.
Good evening, and thank you, Mr. Ballard. I moved my family to the Lehigh Valley in 1998. We lived in Los Angeles and knew very little about this area. Our number one concern was the quality of the school district. Everyone we talked to recommended the same too. Of those, East Penn offered the best combination of great schools, proximity to work, and homes within our price range. We bought a home in Lower McCungy, and we've been there now 15 years. We have 2 children in Emmaus High School and 1 in Lower McCungy Middle School. We're proud of our children. Our daughter in the high school is one of the 5 girls who shaved her head for the cancer fundraiser. And we're proud of the schools they attend. Recently on Twitter, the following exchange occurred with an East Penn school board director. Before I read to you the tweets, which by way of warning are quite vulgar, I want to note that I'm a journalist and consider myself as strong a defender of free speech as anyone. This exchange on March 8th began when someone named Todd Kincannon posted this: "There is nothing more brain-rotting than public schools. God, I pity the proletariat for having to send their inferior crotch fruit to them." In reply, East Penn School Board Director Julian Stoltz wrote this: "As a school board director, I wish I could disagree. As a sentient being, I cannot." As I said, I don't question Mr. Stoltz's freedom to insult the 8,000 students who attend East Penn schools, including my 3 children. If he considers them to be inferior, I assume to children in private schools, he's certainly entitled to that opinion. My question is, why does a person who holds in contempt our children and their parents and all the taxpayers of our district take up one of just 9 positions on our school board? How can this person, who considers the 8,152 students of our district to be the inferior offspring of the proletariat, serve the cause of public education? Again, my issue is not with the fact that Mr. Stoltz holds these repellent views. My problem is that Mr. Stoltz uses his position on our school board as the source of his authority to support those repellent views. Tonight I ask that Mr. Stoltz resign from the East Penn School Board. A director who ridicules the people he serves and who despises the very idea of public education can't possibly perform his duties in a way that helps our children and our taxpayers achieve the quality of education we all aspire to. And I thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Schiller.
Mr. Ballard, given the nature of the comments, I've asked for an opportunity to respond.
It would be best if we waited a little considered time, but if you wish to do it now, you may have a couple of minutes.
While I don't agree with the language that Mr. Kincannon used, and I have called him on it on several occasions. Anyone who's familiar with my Twitter account knows that. I agree that there are many problems with public education in this country. The East Penn School District is an exception to the rule, where children in certain districts are trapped in very poor schools and teachers that may not have the same interest in education they do in the East Penn School District. I do not consider that to be the case in our school district. I think that we do a great job, and I look forward to continuing to take part on this board and continue to uphold the excellent nature of our educational system in the district. Thank you.
Mr. Ballard, can I respond?
No rebuttals, please.
If you'd like to talk to me afterwards, stick around.
All right, that's the last request to address the board that I have. The next item on the agenda is approval of minutes. Can I have a motion, please? Is there any discussion or corrections to the minutes? None appearing. All those in favor say aye to approve the minutes. Aye. All those opposed? The minutes are approved. The next item on the agenda is the report of the Superintendent of Schools, Dr. Thomas Seidenberger.
Thank you, Mr. Ballard. First, I'd like to inform the board that one of our third grade teachers from Jefferson Elementary School, Sally Yencho, she was named the B104 February Teacher of the Month, so congratulations to Sally. She does a great job. I'm very happy for her. Also, I think last board meeting we mentioned that we will be upgrading parent access to EduLink. We now, parents will have an opportunity to place 2 more phone numbers in the fields, and so we're happy that's going to take place, and parents can do that through the home access center. So we're happy, and again, I want to thank the parent who came out and suggested that maybe we can enhance that, and certainly there's evidence that we do listen to parents. Also want to remind the board that the Emmaus High School Counseling Department will be sponsoring a regional college fair on May 1st. This will not only be for East Penn students, but will be for students from local high schools will be held from 6 to 8 p.m. in the Emmaus High School gym. We are anticipating that over 100 post-secondary organizations will be present. Not only will there be institutions of higher education, but also some technical schools, and so we're very happy to be hosting this event. More information will be forthcoming from the Emmaus High School Guidance Department. Also, sorry, I have this nagging cold. Also, pleased to inform the board that we've had several staff members that have received recognition from the Pennsylvania Department of Education for their outstanding work in the Pennsylvania Autism Initiative. So we have Erin Pattigan and staff. Erin is a staff member at Emmaus High School. Jen Glendenmeyer and also people that work with her from Wescosville, and Mike Bear and his staff from also Wescosville. They received a certificate of outstanding achievement in recognition of achieving model status for independent, model independent status for 2011-2012. This is a very difficult award to get it, and I certainly want to commend the people that work in our autistic program, Mrs. Desiderio, Dr. McCarrick, Mrs. Curtis, and all the people associated with our artistic program. Congratulations. I'm going to give a little precursor to my introduction to budget books. There is some legislation that has percolated, Mr. Ballard. I hope I don't step on your toes. But I think for budget purposes, this is a significant year. I think a lot of times in the past, superintendents, colleagues of mine, we've had a lot to say about critiquing the legislature. This is the first year in a long time that I actually see some response going on and some opportunities, I think, for legislation to correct some problems with laws that are impacting how we operate. And first one I want to give to the board, Jim Frank has put together for you a spreadsheet regarding what would our cyber and charter school costs look like with a piece of legislation that's being considered in Harrisburg. Rather than go through the numbers, there's a complete breakdown for you, and I want to thank Jim for his outstanding work. First page is a spreadsheet. All the explanations are there for you. You can see exactly what goes into the calculations for cyber and charter school cost. And through Jim's efforts, it would appear that this particular piece of legislation went through that we would save $102,000 next year on our cyber and charter school bills. So take a look at that. If you feel so compelled to support that particular legislation, you certainly know where to contact our local legislators. The second thing that's of importance to me, and as we get into the budget discussion, something I'm going to ask the board to consider, and that is additional security measures, at least at Emmaus High School in terms of a school resource officer. I'm pleased to relate that Senator Scarnati has indicated that he will be introducing legislation in the very near future that will raise Safe Schools budget from $500,000 to $10 million. And that will allow districts to submit grant applications, much like it was when when Safe Schools first came out, and we would be eligible if this legislation goes through and is ultimately passed, to submit grant monies to help us support a school resource officer or a school security measure. So this is something that we would want to take a look at, and if the numbers look good, certainly get behind. So we want to thank Senator Scarnati for being very timely. The other thing I think sort of leads us into the conversation about the agenda item regarding transportation, and that is Senator Ward will be reintroducing Senate Bill 1507, and I want to remind the board that this particular bill did have bipartisan support before, so I think anytime you see bipartisan support, that is something that we should pay attention to. And again, this legislation, or at least prospective legislation, is directly related to mandate waiver relief and would allow school districts to put in a waiver through PDE, which will allow, in essence, school districts to ask parents who have no inclination to use transportation, that they could in fact fill out a waiver form and, in essence, give up their rights to transportation if the district offers transportation in the district. This is a little different than what we talked about would happen next year at the high school with our will call. We would be able to bypass that completely and just ask parents, if you're not going to use transportation, hey, how about telling us? And then maybe we can save some money on reducing the number of bus runs we have. So this is something that I think we should pay attention to, and I, for one, can get behind that legislation. So with that in mind, this is Sirlaw. Do we have the books that they given out? Okay. Let me just share with you some preliminary comments as we give our budget books out, which I guess officially kicks off the budget season. And as always, I would expect a lively debate. I would expect nothing less. This is one of the most important things we do every year. And as I noted, I'm going into this year's budget more optimistic than I've been in a long time. First of all, here's the good news. Please recall that we did not ask your permission to seek the exceptions this year, so we did not go through those gyrations. The good news is the last at least 2 years we have not used any of the, or used very little of the exception values. So this year we were very confident from the beginning, from the outset, that we would produce a budget that at a minimum, and I say at a minimum, would bring us in at the exception. So tonight you have in front of you just a basic kickoff that is at 1.69% increase, which is certainly under the exception. But here's a couple things going forward. I would strongly urge you to read the book. Ms. Sirlaw and her staff, they do an excellent job of developing a narrative, and I think it's important for every board member to understand the narrative. It's one thing to get the numbers. I think it's another thing if you look at the narrative that we spend a lot of time developing. So please do that. The second thing is, this year I did produce a series of, or set of goals that I hope would guide us in our decision-making going forward when we get into crunch time regarding what things are going to be kept in the budget and what things may be jettisoned away. But here are a couple overriding comments as we get into the specifics. And we certainly plan on giving you an update on each and every board meeting from this moment forward. And again, tonight at 1.69, but here's the good news, I'm very confident that that number will be reduced. And I'm very confident. So I think that's been a big step forward this year. We don't have to play that dance, are we going to be over the exception or not? So we're there. And as always, I make a promise that we'll do everything we can to present a budget that is educationally sound but fiscally prudent as well. Here's some things that you should know. Going forward, because of the status in Harrisburg, even though in the budget presented by the governor, he talks about basic education funding going up, in our case, about $306,000. We have chosen not to include that figure in the budget at this particular moment. However, we have included a partial amount of the ABG grant. Basically, about the same amount of money that we put in last year. We're getting pretty consistent information that that's going to happen. We're not quite sure about the basic education funding. We have heard nothing that I want to bet my reputation on at this point, although I'm a little more optimistic than I have been in the past. So again, we get 306,000 increase in basic education funding. Those you can do the math, and I'll break the big number that you should keep in mind as we move forward is the increase that represents where we are right now is about, well, it is specifically $1,320,000. It's $1,320,617. That's where we are. That's the target number that we're going to be working on for you. So if we get the basic education funding, simply subtract it off the top, and you can see we'll be approaching a figure where we were last year. There's some things, though, that I want to let you know that we haven't quite resolved yet, and we need to pay attention to going forward. Number one, we're certainly concerned about the status of assessment appeals, not reassessment, but there is a backlog of assessment appeals. Now, to give you an example, Mrs. Erdewahl's done her homework, and I can tell you, based on the data that we see, we lose about 66% of those cases. So it's very difficult, again, to get a handle where we're going to be exactly what the net worth of real estate revenues that we might bring in. That could be significantly impacted as we go forward. So we're concerned about that. We are hopeful that the county will move some of these things forward and give us definitive answers, but something at this point we would like to be able to have some flexibility moving forward. Again, a big number. We do not know about pension reform. And for the public needs to know that it's Board of Education, the superintendent, we don't control what goes on in Harrisburg regarding pensions. That is a function of PESers and the legislature. We don't control. We just are told what percentage we put in the budget, whether we like that amount or not. Doesn't matter what our opinions are. Doesn't matter what our positions are. We deal with the number moving forward. However, we expect a lot of activity in Harrisburg regarding this issue. There's potential. There's something called the pension collar that could be enacted if the legislature acts on some of the governor's recommendations, and that pension contribution could be reduced. Again, it doesn't necessarily mean we're in favor. We're not in favor of that. That is a major political development that could impact this budget moving forward. I do want to say one thing about liquor store privatization that will have no impact on this budget whatsoever. Whatever vote is taken in the House and in the Senate, that will have no impact in this budget. In fact, I want to remind the board that if this goes through and the legislature agrees with the governor that any sale of the state stores or any sale of licenses, that there's a bank of money that would go to support 4 separate activities. That money would only be available in 2014, 2015. We don't know exact specifications, but again, in my humble opinion, that would be like flow-through money. It would be money in and out, and I certainly would not consider that money to lower local taxpayer obligations. If that money would come through, it would certainly be one-time expenditures. As I have noted, it seems like every board meeting since last year, we are concerned about servicing our special education students tonight. I was giving good news about some of our outstanding teachers. Our autistic population keeps increasing. With the governor's recommendation that special ed be held harmless, and really it's a realistic 0.5% cut, because he wants to increase the level of funding for extraordinary aid. I still remain very concerned about special education funding. This would be 6 years in a row. We would held harmless. Just look at the CPI level funding. And I can tell you that it's a net loss. So in our conversations with our local legislatures, this is something that we really want to embrace, that the legislature look at the way special ed is funded. Very encouraged again that Senator Brown's going to be leading the charge to at least look at how student dollars are allocated. And as I mentioned several times, When we look at the broad picture of the kind of students we serve, the classifications of those who are in most serious need of services are at the higher end. So I'm optimistic that we would see some increases in special ed funding. Legislation like that would pass. Enrollment patterns still continue to fluctuate. We just completed the first round of kindergarten registrations. Thank Mrs. Campbell. I think the number was about 367. It's a little light when we look at the last couple of years. In fact, we had a chance to look at the numbers. I would say 4 years ago we had about a little over 500. Then we dipped down to 400, high 400s. Last year was 514. And this year, if we take a look at the number of registrations so far and add an average of about 75 students every year that register between our spring registration and what shows up every year, we get about 75 more. So we would be looking at a kindergarten class this year of about 460, which is about 55 less than what we're serving this year. However, the numbers are really strange, and we have to take a look at them. For instance, Willow Lane, we're already at 100 registrations next year in kindergarten. This year we're serving 81. On the other hand, McCungy is down about 22, and Shoemaker's down about 19, and Albertus is down a significant number as well. So I have no idea what this means, but something's happening in the community, and we'll certainly try to connect with our principals and parents to see what's going on. We have not held our spring real estate meeting, and we'll ask our agents that come in, is there something going on with home sales that's influencing this number? And we'll do our best to get a handle on it, but again, every year, kindergarten numbers seem to be strange. It looks like this year, less students than we served last year, yet our overall enrollment is up. So I don't know, we'll just have to wait and see what's going on. Also, at this point, we still don't have an exact number of retirements. As you do know, we take the time to calculate salary differentials and benefit differentials when we get those numbers. We will continue to do that. And we still don't have a full complement of people who would be opting for retirement. As noted, my superintendent's report on transportation, which I submitted to the board February 11th, we are looking at some opportunities that I want to emphasize this. I'll be careful what I say, not necessarily Willow Lane. But we talked about some other things, the will call transportation, possibly working with 7 Generations in St. Anne's to look at some merging of students on similar buses. So, and also working very diligently with First Student to see if we can reduce the number of runs. So at this point, I'm still optimistic that we may be able to do something with transportation funds in the budget. Also, another thing that I look at every month, and in long conversation with Mrs. Sertable, she knows I visit her often, and that is we'll certainly look at our revenue streams. They continue to be basically positive, but we have a couple more months that we'll take a look at to see if there's anything we can do to improve. I think your budget document will show that we're increasing revenues by about 2.4%. I think that's a little aggressive, but I'm confident, but we'll also take a look at the number, see if we can increase that number somewhat. We continue to, my department persons continue to look at their budgets. We will have another round of conversations. We'll look at spending patterns like we do every year, and to see if there's an opportunity to adjust going forward. Also, something looming that the board may or may not deal with, and I certainly don't know, but certainly there's no resolution on the TIF that could have an impact on the budget decision. I'm not going to say one way or the other, but certainly there's no firm decision on that moving forward. We also know that there could be a new housing development that could take place in Lower McCungy Township. We'll have to take a look at what the speed of that construction process would be, and what the impact would that be most likely on the Albertus school. Also, I'll be having another round of conversations with each township or borough manager to see if there's anything that's happened since I talked to them last fall, anything that could happen in the way of development, and we certainly will be paying attention to what's going on in Lower McCountry Township, especially with Mr. Gandil and his schemes. One of the things that we have not dealt with, and that's sequestration. We certainly don't know what the impact. The guiding principle is that if Congress does not fix this issue, we could be looking at a 5% decrease in federal funds. I think we could be okay for Title I. We don't get a whole lot of money in Title I services. However, I would be very concerned if our special ed flow-through funds would take a 5% heat, especially with our special ed population increasing. So we're going to have to wait and see, and I'm not optimistic that anything's going to happen, but any information we get from Washington will be greatly increased. I'd like to do every year, I'll give the board and the public some reminders. Again, as I mentioned earlier, state aid, if we get an increase this year, that will go a long way in reducing this budget. I do remind everyone, same old argument we've had now with Governor Corbett for the last 2 years. When we were getting reimbursements for charter school, last percentage we got was about 23%. That still represents about $850,000, folks. If somehow we could lobby the legislature to put that amount of money in, do the math. So we're right now 1.3 million, so that's 306,000 plus 850,000. And if we look at the data I just gave you about doing something with charter schools and how they're funded, that's about another 125,000 folks. We're almost at another tax increase. And it's certainly something with an increase in state aid for special ed. Again, I think we're going to be in a better position to get some action out of the legislature this year. So my recommendation, strong recommendations, take a look at the budget books, take a look at our goals, and then Mrs. Sertable, Mr. Delancey, and I will be talking about specifics of each board member, of each board meeting, until we ask you to vote on and amend the budget. Thank you, Mr. Malley. That's all I have.
Thank you, Dr. Seidberger. Are there any questions for Dr. Seidberger on his report? Mr. Stoltz?
Just one comment, and Chuck, you may comment on this later with your legislative report, but I wouldn't say that the negotiations with the Liquor Control Board will have no impact on our budget. We may very well get more money as a result, depending on what the governor is forced to concede in his negotiations with the state senate, particularly given the much narrower majority that the Republicans now hold, and it's effectively not a functional one because most of them are bought by unions anyway, so he'll have to promise a lot to get through.
Well, we'll take any state aid.
That's the thing.
Anything else? Not appearing. Let's move on to item 2, under 5.2, personnel. Can I have a motion, please?
Second.
Is there any discussion on the personnel items? Mrs. Sanchez?
Am I correct that David Silvies is a principal?
Yes. At higher Middle School.
Anything else? Mrs. Sanchez?
That's fine, it was noted as assistant.
Mr. Earnshaw?
Yeah, I'd just like to make a brief comment about Mr. Silvies. My children had the privilege, some of them anyway, had the privilege of being at IRE with Mr. Silvies both as an assistant principal and as the principal, and he has been an outstanding administrator there. He has not simply been a caretaker for the last 2 years, but has done a phenomenal job of moving the school forward, keeping the sense of family and community that exists at IRE Middle School, and I thank him very much for his service to the district. I'm seriously tempted to vote no, but that wouldn't be fair to Mr. Silvies and his family, so I will certainly vote yes. But we certainly have been greatly benefited from his service to the district and to our students, and we will miss him greatly. We wish him all the best and a long, happy, and healthy retirement.
Thank you, Mr. Kirkhoff. Anything else on this resolution? Now appearing, Ms. Birdsell.
Ms. Fuller.
Aye.
Mr. Politano.
Aye.
Mr. Earnshaw.
Aye.
Mr. Rhodes.
Aye.
Ms. Townshend.
Aye.
Mr. Walker.
Aye.
Mr. Stoltz.
Aye.
Ms. Hyde. Aye. Mr. Ballard.
Aye.
9 ayes.
All right, now we have 5.3, East Penn School District Calendar. Can I have a motion, please?
Second.
Dr. Kleinberger, would you like to explain this item?
Well, I think it, as the board knows, we try to work with our partners and our colleagues. I'm pleased to say that every district in Lehigh County, with the exception of Parkland and Allentown, will now be starting before Labor Day. As you know, we try to work in concert with each other so that we don't interrupt the flow of the programming at LCTI and what goes on through the IU. I think this is a pretty traditional kind of calendar. We do share similar in-service days with, again, our colleagues in Lehigh County, so we don't disrupt. And again, our intent is not to disrupt the flow of LCTI. Problematic every year would be bad weather. And what we've tried to do the last couple of years is give parents an indication of what our thinking would be when and if we have to do makeup days. And so I think we've done a better job of that in the past. Also, it's kind of expressive. Everyone will know when PSSA testing is going to take place, when keystones are going to be given. So I think it's pretty traditional, but very expressive school calendar. Yep.
Okay, are there any questions on the school calendar? Ms. Sanchez.
Just making sure I'm reading right, that there are no possible snow makeup days except for the very end of the year?
No, we have February. Valentine's Day next year will be a makeup day. And 4/17.
Thank you.
I wouldn't want to be Valentine on Valentine's Day. So we'll just hope that we don't have bad weather.
Okay, any other questions? Now appearing, Ms. Birdsell, will you call roll, please?
Mr. Earnshaw.
Aye.
Mr. Rhodes.
Aye.
Ms. Townshend.
Aye.
Ms. Fuller.
Aye.
Mr. Politano.
Aye.
Mr. Walker.
Aye.
Mr. Stoltz.
Aye.
Ms. Hyde. Aye. Mr. Ballard.
Aye.
9 ayes.
All right, we have item 5.4, the transportation resolution. Can I have a motion, please?
Second.
All right, discussion on this item. First, we'll start with Dr. Seidenberger.
Thank you, Mr. Ballard. Just want to follow up on a couple of comments that were made earlier this evening. I don't know exactly when Mr. Suzik is going to be done with his drawings. He's working on them overtime. I do know that we have a time-sensitive issue, and I'm confident that Paul will do his very best to get those drawings into the township as soon as possible. To answer your question, Mrs. Coonan, the drawings have to be approved by the township. And that's the only person who's ever going to submit those plans to at this point in time. Let me make a comment about the statements that were made last board meeting about possible members of our staff not being forthcoming with putting a date on our calendar after it happened. I spoke to Mr. Berger privately after the board meeting, and I will tell you that his checking of certain dates, well, he was correct. But what he doesn't know is that on February 25th, I was in the middle of a meeting, and I had several of my staff members. When we had a conversation, I asked Mr. Loney to give me some information, and he did, and that counts for an update on February 25th. Certainly, there were multiple members of my staff sitting in the room with me. So I think Mr. Berger's contention that perhaps we doctored something on February 25th is certainly incorrect. Also, on March 7th, I had a TIF meeting. I came back after the TIF meeting. It was a Thursday. Made a call to Mr. Moan and Mr. Stavanger, and asked them once again about certain information. They were kind enough to send me the original information I got on February 25th, and also communication from Dr. Moore, which indicated that he had asked our technology staff as early as November 21st to put this notification on the district website. Goes from the website immediately to the school's website. So again, that would account for what Mr. Berger thought may have been some inappropriate behavior. So at this point, I would certainly disagree with his contention that some members of my staff did something inappropriate. Okay, let's move on to the recommendation. As I mentioned before, we spent a lot of time with this transportation study. And as I noted way back when we told you that we were going to do this, we looked at a lot of aspects. And I think early on, and I think we shared that with you in February, we knew that Willow Lane has some unique issues. And I want to say this with all due respect, also not certainly to be confrontational, but almost from day one, we had a lot of parents transporting students to that school. And I think it's important for the board and the public to understand that for the first 2 years, everyone was offered transportation to that school. So I think it's important to understand that the district did not create traffic issues at Willow Lane. We simply did not. We did our part. And as I mentioned before, we went to work, opened up Lower McCungie Elementary School to Cambridge. We have before school daycare. We transport students routinely from daycares. And so the onslaught of traffic was certainly not of the district's making, nor was it Lower McCungie Township's making. It simply was parental choice not to use the busing services that were made available to parents. So, and that, quite frankly, is something that moving forward, and that's why I made the mention about Senator Ward's possible legislation. I've said in the report I gave to you in February that it's certainly something that Dr. Moore can work with his parents and say, if you want to lessen traffic in that school, you need some parental cooperation. And I think he's willing to look at carpooling. It would certainly be something we would be interested in. The one survey, it seemed to be enough parents that would be interested in that. That's something he could pursue. Also, perhaps some walking school bus situations, but nonetheless, I'm confident that Dr. Moore can work with parents to lighten that traffic. But that being said, I think we're also realistic on two levels. Obviously, asking the board to make 330 students walk would certainly be an overwhelming situation. That's one of the reasons why I didn't recommend that at this particular point. And I like the words compromise. I think compromise, but also common sense, maybe are appropriate in this situation. And so when we look at this recommendation, what does it mean in terms of students? 0.75 would allow us to offer transportation to just about 200 of those 330 students that would, if we're looking at a 1.5 distance. So we cut that by almost 2/3. So what would be left? About, our estimations, anywhere from 125 to 140 students would live within 0.75 miles to that school and then would not be offered transportation unless they are a special education student or unless there are some mitigating circumstances of students injured. And I will say this publicly tonight that we certainly, if some parent feels that they're beyond that 0.75, we will show them enough respect to go out and certainly measure that distance. So if parents want to dispute that distance, we do that anyway. So we would be acceptable to working with parents on that distance, and we would certainly be willing to meet with any parent that would take exception to that distance. But moving forward, You know, one of the things we did do was have conversations with Sarah Pandel in the township, and we talked about developments in communities and what would expectations, what do planners do when they look at communities and walking distances. And then my staff and I went to work and we looked at, okay, if we were going to ask the board to adopt excuse me, this .75 guideline, what would it mean for other schools? Because I really do, believe it or not, again, not to be confrontational, well, these two parents who didn't seem to be overly sensitized with the sense of fairness, we have to be. I think myself as a superintendent, my staff, I think the board, I don't think you can be put in a position where someone may question if you're arbitrary and capricious. I think if we're going to do this for one school, we really need to do it for other schools. And one of the things I did report out in the transportation study is that I think we were surprised at how few numbers we would have in the other walking schools. And I think the numbers were 20 at Albertus, 12 at Lincoln, and I think 8 at Jefferson, maybe transposed Lincoln and Jefferson. So we're really confident. And again, I don't see any additional costs for picking up that few number of students on the way. And one thing I will concede, I think today is a very different world than perhaps when I was a youngster and I walked that distances, and my mother didn't seem to be overly concerned about me crossing multiple streets. But in today's world, there's a lot more sensitivity to student safety. But the other component in all of my recommendations is the confidence that Lower Country Township will follow through with their part of the deal too. So we still have not heard that vote being taken. I have no reason to believe it won't be taken, but it'll certainly make me feel a lot better. And I will also, go on record for the umpteenth time by saying that if for some reason, the traffic signs, the flashing signs have not been installed, crosswalks have not been done, nor have we have crossing guards that would be able to cross our students safely, then I will come back to this board sometime in late July, like I did last year, and recommend that we continue busing for all the students. So with those provisions in mind, it is my recommendation that the board look at, not necessarily creating a policy, but developing a new guideline where we would offer transportation to all elementary students who live a distance of 0.75 miles away from school. And for those students who do live along hazardous roads, we will continue to transport those students that have had that dangerous road identified by Penn.
Thank you, Dr. Seidberger. Commentary? Questions? Ms. Fuller?
Dr. Seidberger, I congratulate you and your staff and the public. I congratulate you. I mean, it's been a long journey together. But I think this plan demonstrates that concerns have been heard and incorporated. The first time .75 was suggested was during a public comment period. And I would simply like to offer my opinion that Lower McCungie Township is really simply waiting for our movement. I think I mentioned at the last meeting, I happened to see the Lower McCungie Township engineer at an event, and we had a conversation about the Willow Lane situation. He indicated to me that Lower McCungie is ready to make the improvements, but simply needs the school district to make the first move. So I think that our vote tonight, if we vote in favor of the study, of the .75 recommendation, we will see them taking action very, very quickly. And I'm very happy to vote in favor of this resolution.
Thank you, Ms. Fuller. Mr. Bacher?
I just like to ask a question. I've had some people ask me how the distance is calculated. Is it door to door, or I know I look on the PD website and it's from the driveway to point where the road
As a
is close
young,
to the property. So I just wanted to ask if we do pass this.
I think I'm going to call some of my old friends in Bethel. One of my jobs when I worked for the superintendent, Dr. Frankie in Bethel, was to referee disputes between our transportation department and parents. We had a wheel that we used to attach to the back of our car, and we used to calculate that. We're going to call Jerry Keogh to see if that wheel still exists. But I think, look, one of the things that Mr. Clancy and I and Dr. Marabella is, I will gladly come back, and I think they can report back in the next board meeting. I'd like to hear from Mr. Clancy, it's his department. Whatever we do, we must do on a consistent basis, Mr. Bacher. And so that I can assure you will happen. And that we will, as I mentioned earlier, we will certainly work with parents that feel that that they have a legitimate case. We will go out and we will measure, probably double measure, and we will use the most direct method.
I was just going to ask if we could pass this. I'm sure a lot of people will be concerned where they line and would like to know what the guidelines are so they can.
There's another element, and again, one of the things that, I'll say this again, that we've been trying to do, and again, Mr. Moen and his department, working with Verzatran, one of the things that hopefully we'll be able to do in the not too distant future is for parents to click on their address and see exactly how far away they are from the school, and that will give them an indication, rather than guessing. I don't know how far we are away from realizing that potential, but that is one of our goals and has been our goal in this process.
I will note that tonight we're also dealing with the policy, and I was going to suggest that if we approve this resolution, we make that resolution an addendum to that policy, which is on transportation. Therefore, if we change the distance later, we can just change the addendum without having to change the whole policy, but it will all be in one spot. That is both the overall transportation policy and the current distance that we are busing, since that is a decision of the school board. Are there any other, we can discuss that when we have
We
the
discuss
policy.
that when we discuss the policy.
Okay. Mrs. Domchek, did you have your hand up?
Yes, I was kind of back to where Dr. Bacher was mentioning about the measuring. Is it from the door or from the end of the property?
I'm going to let Mr. Glancy, as I said before, we'll come back and we'll give you a specific distance on that, how we calculate it. When I did it in Bethlehem, it was door to door.
Okay, because I know that we came over and there was like a 0.2 mile lane and a 0.3 mile lane, so there's already a fair amount of.
Let me answer this way. We've had enough controversy. Okay? I think what we're going to do is use discretion. And I think that's a nice way of saying we're going to be diplomatic. And I don't think we want to go to war with some parent over 1 foot or a yard or a little bit of distance. So we're going to do something that makes sense. Okay, but I'd like for Mr. Clancy to tell you exactly how he's going to go about doing it.
And the cost, it
We will-
looks as if we're saving.
Well, still, I think in my transportation report, I think I have it listed on page
23.
23, still going to save about $54,000. That's my calculation.
And is that counting for the guards and
Yes.
staff overtime?
Yes.
Or, extra
Yes.
work?
Yes.
And do we know, Mrs. Canoe was asking which of the safety concerns will be addressed on the plans?
I think the one thing that we were looking at was the blacktop along the fence. To see if, I think Paul's going to be putting that in as an alternate. The question is, can we engineer that fence? That incline is pretty steep. I don't know if we're going to be able to do that. I've not seen Paul's drawings, but I know that he was going to attempt to do that.
And with the reduction in the drop-off spaces? Are we-
I'm not so sure I'm ready to make that concession tonight. without talking to my staff.
Remember, we're not talking about that plan, which has only gone forward, we haven't funded it yet.
I don't know that. I'm not, until I know that specifically, I'm going to pass it out, okay? I'd rather make sure we give you an answer from our engineer rather than responding and saying, I guess, and be wrong later on.
Was there, did you get the idea that there was a consensus that the fire company was satisfied with that plan?
All I can tell you is in our conversations over the last 2 years, the fire department has asked us routinely to see what we can do about parents coming up the main driveway. I think we did the responsible thing in moving the entrance to the car entrance to Mill Creek. That's our response. They made that point consistently over a 3-year period. Every time we met with them, can you do something about the traffic? Well, as I said before, one of our goals was to work with the township and the Mill Creek entrance, gets the parents away, gets the cars away from the main entrance. Now we're only going to deal with maybe 9, 10 buses, and that's a lot better. So, I think so. We're also going to be looking at some of the gates, the gate location that you suggested. I know we're going to be doing that.
Well, thank you, Ms. Sanchez. Mr. Earnshaw.
So just to clarify a few items. First of all, what we're talking about now only deals with Willow Lane in the context of the entire district. What we are saying is we will offer for elementary school students who live 3/4 of a mile or farther from their schools courtesy bus transportation. This has nothing to do with drop-offs at Willow Lane. It has nothing to do with traffic patterns at Willow Lane. It has nothing to do with engineering improvements at Willow Lane. It has nothing to do with ending transportation at Willow Lane for students who live less than 3/4 of a mile. This is simply stating what our district's policy is going forward for next year. And then all the other things that we've talked about are separate issues that will be dealt with in due course when the time is right. When we know that Lower Macungie has their safety improvements in place, that's when we would move to potentially end busing for students who live closer than 0.75 miles. But until then, we're maintaining the status quo, and this motion doesn't impact it.
That's correct.
Right, so let's be clear about what we're voting on tonight. And I think that as we've had in our transportation study, this is not going to cost us additional money by providing this transportation to those students at Lincoln, Jefferson, and Alberta. So we think we can absorb them into the current transportation setup that we have. And any savings will not come unless we eliminate busing for those students who live within 3/4 of a mile of Willow Lane. Is that correct?
That is correct.
All right. So right now, we're talking a cost-neutral thing, no change in the status quo at Willow Lane, but providing some additional services to about 40 or so students at other schools.
That's correct.
All right, so I just wanted to make sure everyone was clear what we're voting on tonight. And I certainly appreciate the rigor with which the study was done and the analysis that went into it. And I look forward to continuing to evolve our transportation program, looking for those cost savings with things like the Will Call program and other options that we'll be addressing at a future point. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Earnshaw. Mr. Foltz?
I suppose there's one more in every minute. I have a question, legitimate question. If this is in effect a policy change, which is what Mr. Earnshaw just postulated, then why is this not being done with a formal policy change procedure with a first and second reading and then a change to our existing policy rather than a vote here and then done as an addendum to an existing policy change? That seems a little strange to me.
Well, first of all, current policy, this would not be a policy change to, because the current policy is silent about what our busing distance is.
So it's a new policy.
What we're doing is making a resolution about what our courtesy busing is, and I was suggesting that we could make it clearer to the public. It doesn't have to have been in the policy, but it would be clearer for them to find it on our website, put it as an addendum so that you know what the current resolution is.
But Mr. Earnshaw just stated that it is a policy change and it is not, that it doesn't necessarily affect Willow Lane busing one way or the other, except for it guarantees busing to those that live over 0.75.
Well, I believe he was referring to the situation where we've discovered that we have a number of students who live in 0.75 to 1.5 miles that we weren't busing before, that if we adopt a uniform policy, which we've never had before, formally, adopted by the board, then we would make it clear that those students are being picked up.
Well, if we're adopting a new policy, again, shouldn't we by procedure, you're a procedure guy, Mr. Ballard, do a first and second reading, have a new policy and adopt it? I don't have any problem with that. I'm just trying to clarify why we're doing it this way.
It's a question of interpretation of what a policy is in terms of the formal policies we have, and the board stating what our courtesy transportation direction is. Mr. Earnshaw?
Let me clarify. The word policy as used in the distance with which we transport students is not correct. It's not a policy question. This is a district decision of how we are going to practice our transportation and how we are going to implement the policy. So the policy is on the agenda tonight for a second reading. Nowhere in it does it ever mention how far we will transport students or under what circumstances we'll transport them. So this is what we are saying is we're being explicit now that we are changing our practice from only busing students that live over 1.5 miles to now busing students that live 3/4 of a mile or further. And I don't see it as a policy change so much as just a practice of the district. We don't have a policy that outlines the GPA percentages that's an A. Yet the district practice is a 92% is an A. But we don't have that anywhere in our policy, nor would the board adopt it as a policy. So I don't see, I'm not sure I would get all caught up in the word policy, and I would not use it in this case. If I did, I misspoke. I apologize. Thank you, Mr. Ballard.
Anyone else? Ms. Birdsall, will you call the roll, please?
Mr. Rhodes.
Aye.
Mr. Earnshaw.
Aye.
Ms. Fuller.
Aye.
Mr. Politano.
Aye.
Mr. Bacher.
Aye.
Mr. Stoltz.
I abstain.
Ms. Hyde. Aye. Ms. Natchez.
Aye.
Mr. Ballard.
Aye.
8 ayes, 1 abstention.
All right. Move on now to the policies. We have 2 policies up for consideration tonight. Can I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second.
All right. Discussion on those policies.
What is the correct way to add an addendum to a policy?
You can just add it tonight.
I'm in favor of adding an addendum to clarify if that makes it easier to interpret policy.
Is it the consensus of the board that we add that as an addendum, which an addendum on a policy is something you can change without changing the policy itself? If you did a new motion, a new proposal, you can just put a new proposal there. Mr. Earnshaw?
It's not an addendum. An addendum becomes a part of the policy. We have things that are listed in the system, but I don't believe they're listed as addendum.
Attachment?
I don't know what the current wording we use, but in essence, what we're going to do is post a document somewhere that clarifies our current practices in transportation. I think the district will do that as a matter of course. We don't need the board to direct the administration how and what to do.
This would be
Dr.
similar,
Steinberger might have some ideas on that.
Mr. Bacher still has the floor.
I would say this would be similar to, for example, the rates we charge people for use of school facilities. There's a policy on what procedure to go through for each type of group to rent a facility, but then at the end of the procedure, there's a document that there's an attachment, or I don't remember the terminology either. But
Whatever the board has approved as current rates.
And then the board, to change the current rates, just has to approve the current rates. They don't have to have 2 readings of the policy, and I think that's appropriate. But although I would leave it to the administration.
We could put it as a schedule.
Whatever we do for that, I think that's similar to what we're doing here. So whatever we do on the rental rates, it documents the current rental rate.
That's a good idea. I think what we'll do is reduce this to writing, because I certainly want to be accurate on middle school and high school distances as well. I think if you're just gonna, I think you want to put down what we're doing for all three levels.
So by consensus, we'll have the administration put a schedule on the end of this 609, excuse me, 610, or no, 810, I look at my glasses here, policy saying what the current board resolution is. Anybody object to that? No, then we're voting on the policies. Are there any more comments on the policies themselves? None appearing. Ms. Birdsall, will you call the roll, please?
Ms. Hyde. Aye. Mr. Earnshaw.
Aye.
Mr. Rhodes.
Aye.
Ms. Donahue.
Aye.
Ms. Fuller.
Aye.
Mr. Polidoro.
Aye.
Mr. Walker.
Aye.
Mr. Stoltz.
Aye.
Mr. Ballard.
Aye.
9 ayes.
All right. Now we'll go to other educational entities. Carbon Lehigh Intermediate Unit, Ms. Fuller.
Thank you, Mr. Ballard. What we're being asked tonight is to approve the proposed general operating budget of Carbon Lehigh Intermediate Unit. I would call this budget the framework that allows the CLIU to operate. That the Carbon Lehigh Intermediate Unit provides a variety of services to its member districts, and the member districts pay for those specific services. But to be able to offer those services, there needs to be a budget to pay for staff, for maintenance, for curriculum. And that total budget for the operating budget proposed for this year for all member districts is $823,241. Our portion of that budget is $1,336.309. $136,309 still, I'm so sorry. Which for us is a increase of $411 over the past year. They worked very hard to keep the budget at a very minimal rate. It's a 1% increase over the previous year. And I believe that it is well worth every penny that we pay for those services. So I would propose that we adopt the budget.
The motion that's on the agenda, is there a second?
Second.
All right, it's moved and seconded. Is there any discussion of this item? None appearing. Ms. Birdsall, will you call the roll, please?
Mr. Walker.
Aye.
Mr. Earnshaw.
Aye.
Mr. Rhodes.
Aye.
Ms. Donahue.
Aye.
Ms. Fuller.
Aye.
Mr. Polidoro.
Aye.
Mr. Stoltz.
Aye.
Ms. Hyde. Aye. Mr. Ballard.
Aye.
9 ayes.
All right. We have Lehigh Career and Technical Institute, Ms. Hyde.
I apologize, I grabbed my L-Tri-C budget book, but, so I just might need a couple hands on deck here. Today we're going to look at our general fund and our academic center at the Lehigh Carbon and Technical Institute, and we have decreased by 0.9%, and you have to keep in mind this is all based on enrollment, and I've come up, I looked at my budget book, so thank you. It is, our total amount for operations is going to be $2,218,912. And once again, that's a $19,000 decrease from last year's budget. So I'd like to make a motion for the 2013-14 General Fund and Academic Center school budgets for the LCTI.
Is there a second? Second.
All right, moved and seconded. Is there any discussion or questions from Ms. Hyde? Ms. Donahue?
The same thing. In the resolved that the East Penn School Board of School Directors approved, right now it's the 2012-14, be changed to 2013-14.
something wrong with it. All right, was that change to the maker and the seconder approved? I mean, is a friendly amendment?
It's a correction.
Okay. All right, just a typo. All right, do that. Any other discussion? Mr. Bacher?
Just for clarification, I think you mentioned this, but, so the decrease in $19,000 is mainly due to lower enrollment?
Correct.
To 5-year average or something like that?
Correct, we go by 5-year average.
And it's lower enrollment compared to all the other schools?
Yeah, Allentown has the highest, and Parkland is second, so we just have a lower enrollment over a 5-year average.
Any other questions? Now, Mr. Murtaugh?
I'll just clarify, there are two components to the LCTI budget. There's the operating part of the budget, which is based on your 5-year average enrollment figures compared to all the other districts in the county. And then there's a capital budget, and that's based on the weighted average of the property values of each school district. So we have a relatively small percentage of the operating budget because we don't send that many students there compared to Allentown or Parkland. But we have a much larger part of the capital budget because we have a much larger property base than the Allentown School District or Catasauqua or Whitehall. The capital budget is a much smaller budget, so overall, it works out to whatever our share is, a very, very small decrease from last year. Thank you.
No other questions? Ms. Birdsall, will you call the roll, please?
Ms. Fuller. Aye. Mr. Earnshaw.
Aye.
Ms. Hyde. Aye. Mr. Rhodes.
Aye.
Ms. Donchev.
Aye.
Mr. Polipone.
Aye.
Mr. Bacher.
Aye.
Mr. Stoltz.
Aye.
Mr. Ballard.
Aye.
9 ayes.
All right, we'll move on to legislative. This is what I like to call the legislative silly season. All of the bills start rolling out that people attempt to get through. Some of them make it, some of them don't. And many of them are trial balloons in various areas. I will comment on the legislation about the sales of the liquor stores. The last I heard, there was a quick change of the language so that the money is not put into a separate fund for education, but into some fund, and I'm not exactly sure exactly what it is, but it could be diverted from education, it appears, on where it is now. So it's not specifically earmarked for education anymore in the legislation that was passed in the House. We'll have to see what happens when it gets to the Senate. There's many a slip twixt cup and lip, as Mr. Robert Burns said one time, and we certainly have our cup filled with liquor at the moment. So we'll just have to watch. There are some bills out there that are, like I said, some of these are kind of interesting. House Bill 658 gives school districts the authority to implement local tax credit programs for seniors that perform services in a school district. So we could perhaps have senior hall monitors and give them a credit on their real estate tax if this bill passes.
And Dr. Seidenberger had that program in Avon Grove. I remember him telling us about that 12 years ago, 15 years ago.
Very successful.
Yeah, well, I'll point out that we started out with a much better program and one of the first in the state to do the senior citizen tax rebate program with no requirement for work, but this is one of them that is out there. It has to get past the Senate now. There's some other technical ones about the State Tax Equalization Board, but that is sort of esoteric. There are changes to the House Bill 930 has been approved by the Education Committee. It hasn't passed the House yet, but it makes changes to the Professional Educator Discipline Act and increases reporting and people who must be reported, and whether or not an educator who's arrested or indicted or convicted of certain crimes to report that indictment, arrest, and conviction to the employing school entity within 72 hours, things like that. So that, I think we've seen some of that before, but it didn't get through the House the last time. There's been a resolution to study the status of special education for gifted students in the Commonwealth. There's no bill out there that really changes the formula yet, but there has been a resolution to have a study committee to identify how the changes should be made. The Senate has put a bill forward which requires all school nurses to be certified in cardiopulmonary resuscitation. And the Senate Education Committee has put out a bill, SB 10, which expands the current Safe Schools Grant program and creates a dedicated grant to public and private school entities for the purpose of training and hiring armed guards for schools that want them on premises. Senate Bill 60 is echoing what Dr. Seidberg talked about, allows school districts to apply to PDE for a waiver of pupil transportation requirements. And the amendment requires the school board seeking a waiver to survey the parents of resident pupils prior to the incoming year to determine transportation routes and schedules. The district would have to get a waiver from the parents, and they would not have to provide transportation, and the parent or guardian can revoke the waiver in writing at any time. So that would be along the lines of what Dr. Steinberger was talking about. There's also been a bill through the Senate, I believe, that has mandated that the school district provide facilities to the state fishing game commission, to provide space to teach hunter safety courses. So that, of course, as usual with these mandates, came without any money to provide for whatever we need to do, like janitors after school or whatever time that is necessary for that. So we've just been told we're not supposed to have to provide room and facilities to teach hunter safety courses. There is a bill out there that does implement a new special education formula that's outside the study, and that's House Bill 2. That's from the House, and it will clash with the Senate's approval of this resolution for the Special Funding Commission. It also creates a Special Funding Commission, but it also establishes a formula ahead of that Special Commission. Fairly significantly, this week, Representative Roebuck of Philadelphia, chairman of the House Education Committee, issued a report providing an update on charter and cyber charter schools regarding academic performance and investigation of irregularities. According to this report, there are investigations or problems at 44 charter and cyber charter schools, and that 37 of those schools mentioned are still operating. And he had a number of things about their academic performance. He introduced a bill, House Bill 394, to reform cyber and charter schools, and it parallels what the the Auditor General said in his report last year, that it would save an estimated $365 million for the taxpayers of Pennsylvania. And we're looking forward to seeing discussion on that bill, because that would regularize a lot of the things that Dr. Seidenberger will be discussing. So I urge you to talk to your legislators about these issues, because they're getting hot now on the floor of the House and the Senate, and we may be possible to influence some of them. Are there any questions about current legislation? Or Mr. Stoltz?
Just a comment. I remember about 9 years ago we had a very lengthy conversation. I was about 16 years old when I came to a board meeting discussing using gambling to fund education in this board. I recall passed a resolution sort of proposing that. And I think that it's interesting that our state legislature sees no moral problem with using the sale of liquor and gambling and all other manner of things to fund education, but fails to see the basic morality in eliminating a tax on people's homes and replacing it with a more fair and equitable method of taxation, and fulfilling their constitutional duty to provide an efficient system of education for the children of Pennsylvania. I think it's interesting and worth commenting on.
Can I echo some of those sentiments? Any other questions? None. We'll move on to the report of the TIF committee by Dr. Bacher.
Okay, we had another meeting last Thursday. Discussed more details of the TIF. We had gotten information and we were discussing basically the details and provide input on the plan. One of the things we discussed was how any favorable variances, plans would be a plan, would be treated. It was discussed that the TIF plan will be a worst case scenario for all the government entities involved, and then any improvements in costs or interest rates will reduce the contributions from there or the length of the TIF. There was also some discussion briefly at the end about how the TIF plan will become public, and basically before it gets voted on by any of the government bodies, boards, before it gets voted on by the county, school district, or township, it needs to be approved by the I-County Industrial Development Authority board, since they're the ones coming up with the plan. At that point, it'll be public. And Dr. Seidenberger already indicated that he would put it on our website, the school district's website, so people can see it as soon as it's a public document. There will also probably be some frequently asked questions, just to give people a heads up on the main points in it and how to interpret it. We have another meeting on Thursday. Any questions?
Any questions for Mr. Rhodes? Yes, Mr. Bacher. Is there a time frame set somewhere and how long between it's becoming public and we have to act upon it?
I think the county is going to, the current discussion is the county would vote on it first, and they're going to do it by ordinance. So that will be, they'll put out an ordinance for the first reading, and then they won't vote on it until their next meeting. So there'll be that time period between the county's meetings. They're also going to introduce it at a committee meeting. And then we would go next after that. So I think it doesn't make sense for us to vote on it if the county votes it down. So we would not put it on, I think would not put it on our agenda to discuss it until the county has completed its work on it.
I understand that, but is there a date by which we will have to vote on this?
I don't believe, I haven't seen any end date.
Okay. Thank you.
Has there been any talk, or could you possibly, maybe at another meeting, ask about the prevailing wage? Because we know that this is a concern. I would be curious to know how much extra the project is costing because of the prevailing wage.
So they did mention that the construction work would be covered, I think in this meeting, one of our meetings, when they talked about it, would be covered under the requirement to be prevailing wage. There is, I don't know if it's public, there is, as I mentioned to you before, there is information in the TIF plan. I don't know if that's public yet, the cost, but they have some estimation. And right now, that's just a number, their estimate. One of the things I talked about with costs, before the TIF bonds are actually released, they're going to have firm bids. And that's the point when you know how much bids. You'd have an estimate of how much more we're paying for the work because it's the prevailing wage. So right now, there is an estimate in the document. Again, I don't know if it's public. I can ask it at the next meeting. There is an estimate in there, but the real how much it's going to cost is when the final bids go out and they see what bids they get for the work.
Mr. Bacher, is it possible that their estimate could have contained a prevailing wage estimate also?
They have a line item in the document of what they're estimating prevailing wage to be. So they have costs for the project, and then in additional things they have the prevailing wage.
Additional prevailing wage costs, is that what you're saying?
Yes, there's a line item in the document now. I don't know, I don't think that's public yet. So I don't want to say what it is, but that is in the document. I assume when the document is published, that estimate will be published.
And has the gear that they're going to be asking for been released yet? As far as-
No, I don't believe so, and that's still been for discussion, so I don't think there's a final,
That number is not final until the Lehigh County Industrial Development Authority approves it.
comes up with a plan.
Dr. Zandri?
Just to reinforce what Dr. Bacher was saying, all three governmental agencies, once the Lehigh Valley Economic Council approves this plan, we're automatically going to put it on our website, and then it becomes a very public document. And everything that Dr. Bacher was speaking about, all those figures will be public. So the moment they pass it, we'll have a hard copy. When we know they pass it, we're going to put it on our website immediately. Same time that the county does, and the same time that the township does. The township, by law, will vote last though. That's the way the law reads. Who goes first was open for debate, but it appears that right now the county will go first.
And will our meeting not be a special public meeting, but it will be done here at board meeting?
As far as I know, it's just a regular business item, so it'll come up on a regular meeting.
May I just, we will, Dr. Bacher and I will not be doing a presentation. That will be done by the Lehigh Valley Economic Development Committee.
Or public financial
Right,
management.
yes.
has to be given-
Probably PFM will be doing financials.
They'll present it, we'll have a chance to ask them questions also.
Any other questions on the TIF committee report? Okay, we'll move on to business operations. I have a request to separate item number 1, approval of the bill list. Can I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second.
Okay. Comments on the bill list? None appearing. Mrs. Bertzel, will you call the roll, please?
Mr. Earnshaw.
Aye.
Mr. Rhodes.
Aye.
Ms. Donchev.
Abstain?
Ms. Fuller. Aye. Mr. Polifano.
Aye.
Mr. Bacher.
Aye.
Mr. Stoll.
Abstain.
Ms. Hyde. Aye. Mr. Ballard.
Aye.
7 ayes, 2 abstentions.
Okay. The items 2 and 3, is there any item or objection to combining these 2 items?
Second?
All right. Any commentary or questions on this set of items? None appearing. Ms. Bertzel, will you call the roll, please?
Mr. Polifano.
Aye.
Ms. Fuller. Aye. Mr. Bacher.
Aye.
Mr. Earnshaw.
Aye.
Mr. Rhodes.
Aye.
Ms. Donchev.
Aye.
Mr. Stoll.
Aye.
Ms. Hyde. Aye. Mr. Ballard.
Aye.
9 ayes.
Is there any new business to come before the board this evening? Ms. Donches?
It's just 2 short things. I wanted to thank, is it Mr. Ramella for the conference report on the athletic conference. Thought that was interesting. And do we know if there's any fiscal implications from that, or they would have already been incorporated into the budget?
The big fiscal implications that we're going to have to look in the budget revolve around Title IX. There's been a lot of changes. I don't know if it's going to, I don't think it will increase the budget necessarily, but we're going to have to do more specificity and more specifics in how we report that out. Like anyone else, Mr. Ramel submits his budget, and I can tell you this, we've already cut his budget.
And I also I want to make a motion. I know that we're in the budget process, so I don't know if you want to suspend the rules and actually discuss it tonight, or if it should be on the next agenda. But I would like to make a motion that all the professional services be bid out.
Second.
That's a subject that would require public comment, and therefore we will defer it to the next meeting to be put on the agenda. Mr. Stoltz?
Just a little further expounding upon the, shall we say, incident that happened during public comment. I feel, as I said earlier, that we have excellent schools in the East Penn School District, but a lot of that is because we have de facto private schools because of the cost of living. As I said, there are serious problems with government schools around the nation, particularly in urban centers where low-income children are trapped in failing schools, which is actually why I opposed a resolution that we voted on 2 weeks ago that I feel was designed to weaken school choice. And for anyone who has more interest or concerns as to where I stand on public education and education in this country, I direct them to go to PennsylvaniaConservative.com and read a piece that I wrote, and they're welcome to reprint, distribute, whatever they choose to do, any part of this. The piece is entitled "To Take Back Our Country, We Must First Take Back Our Children." Thank you.
All right, Mr. Stoltz, nothing else coming before me. We had a clear session before this meeting to discuss negotiations, confidential matters, and that should cover it, I think. Okay. All schools will be open on Thursday, March 28th. It's the makeup day. March 29th and April 1st, all schools and offices are closed. I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Meeting is adjourned. Thank you.